What a way for a college football regular season to come to a close. Ends in chaos, just like it starts in chaos. And I'm sure there's still some more chaos to happen here in the future. This is your college football postgame show here as we close up shop on our coverage of this regular season of college football here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and across our Pittsburgh Sports Now family of networks. And for the purpose of this show, we are going to be touching on Pitt claiming their 10th win of the season. So big numbers and big stuff for the Pitt Panthers. They pick up their 10th win of the year with a victory over Syracuse on the road, and they head to the ACC title game against, now we learn, Wake Forest. We're also going to talk a little bit later on about West Virginia and their matchup with Kansas, as they were looking for bowl eligibility against the Jayhawks, and that game was certainly tougher than maybe it should have been for West Virginia. The Mountaineers, though, do get the victory. Their 6th win of the year, so they will get back-to-back bowl games, and will try for back-to-back bowl wins for the first time in over a decade. That has not happened since 07-08. I'm Mike Asti, and to have the conversation to kick things off here about Pitt and Syracuse, I will be joined by Erik, who comes at it from News Channel 9, WSYR, up there in upstate New York. And Erik, to start things off, this game was close early, and then Pitt obviously pulled away there at the end, ending up with a 31-14 victory, kind of what many would have expected in terms of that score based on what Vegas would say and the season Pitt's been having. But what did Syracuse do early to keep that game close and maybe excite some of your fan base there in the first quarter or so? And then what do you think occurred to eventually allow Pitt to pull away? Kenny Pickett becoming the all-time leader in touchdown passes thrown over Dan Marino as well. So he put up the numbers. Was it just that Pitt was eventually too much, or do you notice any difference there in Syracuse as well?
Well, Mike, thanks for having me. I appreciate
Absolutely.
you having me on the show. And yeah, I think you touched on it a little bit there. Syracuse came out needing a win to secure a bowl berth, something they've done only once under Dino Babers in his time here since 2016. That obviously does not happen, but they had a good game plan on that first drive, and it seemed a bit unconventional for Syracuse. As you mentioned, they have a star running back in Sean Tucker. Garrett Schrader is a quarterback who is actually more of a runner than he is a thrower, but on that first drive, they have about 12 plays, 75 yards, and Schrader goes 6 for 6 on that opening drive. They convert a 4th and short to continue the series, and they kind of had everything going for them because they were playing aggressive. They kind of threw caution to the wind, knowing that if they were going to win or at least compete, they had to try to match Pitt score for score. After that touchdown to start the game, they kind of got away from that. Dino Babers is not the most popular coach in these parts for his game management and some of his conservative play calling. And I think you saw some of that rear its ugly head later on in that game after the first half, where they got a little bit more conservative again and surprisingly moved away from Sean Tucker in this one. He only had 13 carries in this ball game for a little over 30 yards, which is totally unlike him, because coming into today, he was one of the top 3 rushers in the nation, was up there for total yards in the line of scrimmage. And people are talking about how he was snubbed for the Doak Walker award. But Pittsburgh defense was so good. I was actually surprised they didn't bring more pressure. I actually covered Narduzzi when he was with Michigan State. And I'm used to him bringing blitzes all the time. They didn't bring as much blitzes as they did. They were still able to manufacture some of that pressure. I believe they had 10 tackles for loss, 5 of those being sacks. So maybe some of that was by design. Maybe they're trying to keep things a little vanilla as they game plan for Wake Forest. But I was surprised at the lack of blitzing from Narduzzi. But as it turned out, they didn't need it because Pittsburgh is obviously the better team when it comes to them against Syracuse. And that showed, because even Kenny Pickett on a day like tonight didn't have the monster yardage when it came against a Syracuse secondary, which is good, but not great and a little banged up in its own right. But he still had the 4 touchdown passes and making history topping Dan Marino. Anytime you do that, that's a good career. But the end result, not surprising.
Yeah, Kenny Pickett only finishes with 209 passing yards in this game, does have a pick, which is also not something that he was doing as much early on in the year. 4 touchdowns, though, in this game, 140 plus in the quarterback rating. Another one of those games for Pickett that he did enough to get the victory, and Pitt clearly the better team with their 10th win of the year here, talking with Erik Columbia here of News Channel 9 and WSYR TV. Now, Erik, it's funny that you mentioned there you're used to Narduzzi from back at Michigan State with the blitz and the strong defenses. Pitt fans probably rolled their eyes a little bit there because Pitt's 2 losses this year from the defense is completely collapsing. Yeah. And that's kind of been Pitt's issue a little bit recently. Their defenses have either been good and then the offense didn't get it done in past years, or this year the offense is what it's become, arguably the best in the country, and the defense had let the offense down so much this year. So it is ironic, but a great performance overall from the defense in this game. I do also want to ask you your thoughts on the upcoming ACC Championship game. We now know that it's going to be Pitt and Wake Forest, and to kind of compare, Pitt gets this big win over Syracuse despite the slow start. They then turn it on. They do what they have to do. The defense has one of their better performances of the year, as you mentioned, shutting down Tucker, who even halfway through the year, some thought maybe he should have knocked on the door for the Heisman if Syracuse could have won more games. Obviously, those things aren't going to now occur. And Syracuse lost to Wake, but 40-37, I believe, was the final score. So points were definitely
was a close game.
Yeah, the game was close. Points were definitely on the board. Wake was undefeated for a while until eventually they had some hiccup there. They dropped out of the top 10 because of that game. So what are your thoughts about that upcoming ACC Championship game? You've now seen both of these 2 teams with 2 completely different results. Obviously, game to game, that you can't read too much into it. Right. Wake could still get it done, despite having a slower day and a worse day against Syracuse than Pitt has had. But you've seen both teams against Syracuse, kind of can be a barometer. What are your now thoughts on maybe who is the better team between those 2 and what kind of matchup that will be for Pitt in the ACC Championship game?
I think this one is going to be a little bit of a track meet. You're going to see a lot of offense in this one. Both offenses can move the chains, score points. Sam Hartman for Wake Forest always seems to play well when he comes to the Dome against Syracuse, and he showed out in that game when they came here earlier in the season, throwing for 330 yards, had 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, and he's like sneaky mobile. He's not going to get a whole ton of yards, but he's good inside the pocket. So Pittsburgh is going to have to try to contain that because he does move well. Servassier Dennis, Syracuse guy, I might add, I covered him when he was at CBA here in Syracuse. He's going to have to lead that defense and help control things. Because Christian Beal-Smith is somebody that you got to watch out for, somebody who could break loose in this one. But I like Pittsburgh because I think the defense is going to be able to get enough stops. Obviously, when it comes to the quarterback play, even though Hartman is good, he's not quite what Pitt has under center in this one with Pickett, because all the fanfare is well deserved for him. But I like Pitt. I like their playmakers in Addison. I love what they do in spreading out the ball early in this contest. What was it? 3 touchdowns to 3 different wide receivers before they went back to Addison for another one. And that was just on a simple screenplay. But you have how many receivers in this contest with the reception? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different receivers with the reception in this one, and 5 of those receivers with multi-reception. So clearly they're heavily balanced on this offense and can do, they're multi-dimensional and don't have to rely on one player. And not that Wake Forest does, but Sam Hartman is the straw that stirs the drink for that Wake Forest offense. So I like Pitt. I think they're a little bit more balanced, a little bit more battle tested. And also, they've been there before. You look at that Coastal Division,
right?
It is just, it seems like a new team every year. Pitt is the first team to finally go back out of the Coastal Division. So I'll give them the edge. Narduzzi is battle tested as well. He's been a coordinator on teams that have gone to big games, won big games. So I like Pittsburgh in the ACC Championship.
I would imagine Pitt will be favored in that game, but you never know with the way things have gone on, certainly these past few weeks around the college football landscape. And Pitt certainly does have some veterans and has that experience, even though this Pitt team getting there this year definitely feels a little different and a much better Pitt team than got boat raced against Syracuse or against Clemson last time they were in that ACC title game. Syracuse maybe. Yeah. So no Clemson. That was one thing too. I said to Pitt fans, obviously Pitt has the win over Clemson. Avoiding Clemson, that's a plus because Clemson's much better now than they were earlier in the year. I don't think any of these teams want to be playing Clemson right now. So Pitt does avoid the rematch against Clemson, even though they already beat Clemson. So Pitt fans can say that. But they will have this opportunity against Wake Forest. Certainly a team that's had a special year as well, maybe even more rare for them. So we will see. We have another solid quarterback battle, and of course, Syracuse still trying to build something there. Before I let you go, you do cover Syracuse. Obviously, Pitt gets the big win over Syracuse here. We've seen Syracuse keep games close. We just mentioned they almost beat Wake. They had this game close early on in this game. They put in the scare to Clemson, even in past years where Clemson's vying for a national title.
Yeah, and
we cover the ACC here.
And listen to this. It was so you had a win versus Liberty by 3 points, loss at Florida State by 3 points, loss against Wake by 3 points, loss against Clemson 3 points. So you had 4 straight weeks where it was 3 points or less. So you win another one of those games, Syracuse is going to a bowl game. So while it is disappointing for Syracuse not to get the bowl berth, that they would have liked, that they wanted to have, a lot of experts, including me, and not that I'm an expert, but people who cover the game.
I'll give you the expert tag. You're a guest on my show.
They expected this team to win 3 games or less. If you were being generous, maybe you would give them 4. So the fact that they got 5, they could have had 6 or 7, is a tremendous growth from last year where they only won 1 game.
I imagine they were really up for this game, though. I imagine that there was conversation and they were trying to get up for this game to play. You can't play the role of spoiler. Pitt was in the ACC title game even if they would have lost this game, and there was some conversation here in Pittsburgh that Pitt actually should have rested Pickett and Addison because there was nothing.
I'm surprised they played their starters as much in this.
Well, game. And Narduzzi made that comment. I think it was even Tuesday. I mean, it was before Thanksgiving. He made it clear everyone's playing in this game. So obviously I'm not saying he wanted 10 wins over wins.
Coach speak though.
I don't know.
Comments too, because I don't think they're ever really going to say, "Oh yeah, we're not going to play anybody. We don't." Take
That's true. That's true. But it's rare that Narduzzi was so out with it because he's sometimes close to the vest. I'll tell you that. So he was out with it. They did play their starters. I don't know if they wanted 10 wins. I don't know what they wanted out of it. Obviously, the ACC title game is more important. The playoff is totally out of the picture anyway. So they played them. They won. No one got hurt. That's a conversation for another day. But I'd imagine Syracuse going in this game, even though they couldn't spoil anything, they had a lot in front of them and they knew the opponent, especially if they were playing their starters. There probably were some Syracuse fans a little bitter that, hey, Pitt, why didn't you rest Pickett and a few others so we could try to get in a bowl game because it couldn't gain anything for Pitt besides win number 10. But
the talk around these parts is whether this season cost Dino Babers his job because he's only had 1 winning campaign in his 6 seasons that he's been here. I, for one, think he's done enough to keep his job.
I mean, based on the expectations you're alluding to. Yeah. Well, Erik, I definitely appreciate the time. I do have to move on here as we have a couple games to discuss here on the show. We'll definitely maybe have you back during basketball season, even though Syracuse doesn't have a bowl berth. But there's definitely more I'm sure you guys are going to be covering around Syracuse athletics. We also will give a shout out here to your colleague there, Alex Sims, who was initially going to be appearing on the show, but I appreciate you pinch hitting for her. And we'll have both of you on at some point here as the years progress. Almost had an opportunity last year in the NCAA tournament, the West Virginia team we cover, and we will segue to playing Syracuse in March Madness. So we'll see what unfolds here. Definitely appreciate the time, Erik, for sure.
Hey, anytime, Mike.
Absolutely. So Erik Columbia joining me here from News Channel 9 up there in upstate New York. WSYR, I believe, are the call letters, and I will now welcome on a familiar face and voice to our post-game show, as I will now get on Greg Carey of West Virginia's Metro News, as the Mountaineers end up getting into a bowl game. So WVU gets the win over Kansas. It wasn't always pretty, and now West Virginia will have their 6th win of the year and will be appearing in a bowl game this year. So we'll get Greg on when he connects and when he can be a part of things here. He's a lot to finish up in terms of his coverage as well. There he is. Greg's joining me here again. Greg Carey of West Virginia's Metro News. The Mountaineers do get the victory, their 6th win of the year. This one over Kansas. Have a few back-to-back wins, actually, to end their season. So this roller coaster ride, that it literally has been that, will end with another game for West Virginia, more practice to see what happens here in the future for Neal Brown as they attempt a climb that maybe is in neutral. But, hey, it's not falling backwards at the very, very least we talked about before. So, Greg, I do want to ask you here. West Virginia gets a 34-28 win. It is over Kansas. This is a Kansas team that's been competitive this year, but they're still freaking Kansas. So I do kind of want to, just talk about this game. And even last week, this team now getting bowl eligibility, just to start off with Jarret Doege in particular. He's looked really good these last couple games. Obviously, the numbers make him one of the better quarterbacks in the conference, if not the best. It is a different conference than what it was years ago. It is now a defensive conference. He's taken his criticism most of this season, but the yards and some of these sexy numbers are still there with him. It appears he's coming back. It appears he's going to be the starter. But is it fool's gold that he's looked so good the last few weeks? Is it because of the opponents? Is he actually getting better and finally progressing to what this team needs him to be at next year? How would you fairly evaluate Jarret Doege? Because the numbers are there now the last few weeks, but we've also seen really bad Jarret Doege, and you're facing Texas, who is far from being back, we've learned, and Kansas that without, looking at a year or two, the last 40 years, they've never really been anywhere. So what do you make of it?
Well, you kind of saw tonight with the mixed bag, the first half, a lot of positives. You talk about a couple touchdown passes to Winston Wright, a couple other plays that they probably felt like they missed on that, maybe the receivers didn't do enough to help him. But then in the second half, the critical mistake, and we've seen that critical mistake plague him so many times throughout his career. And Mike, I'm just looking over some of the numbers from tonight. One of the telling stats, almost all of his passing production came in the first half, and West Virginia finishes this game tonight.
That's fair.
With 261 rushing yards, but 50 of the 72 offensive plays were running plays. So I think it's fair to say after the interception was returned for a touchdown that ultimately allowed Kansas to turn an 8-point deficit into a game, the coaches kind of simplified things. Maybe they lost a little bit of trust in them, but more so they probably felt we're getting a lot of yards turning it out on the ground. And obviously between Letty Brown and Tony Mathis, they were comfortable enough with that offensive game plan to get them to that 6th victory tonight.
Yeah, and West Virginia does get the 6th victory, and obviously getting in a bowl game is better than not getting in a bowl game for the team, for the program, for the university overall. You want to have it, and even for the climb, you want to have that extra week or two of practice. You want to have all that. They do get it. They made their fans sweat a little bit there at the end. The Mountaineers winning at 34-28. 6th win of the year will get them into some type of bowl game. It'll be a mediocre one, but there will be there. And Jarret Doege finishes 16 for 20. 173 TDs, a pick, as Greg mentioned. It's not just any old pick. That's bad as it gets. That was a pick 6 that certainly kept Kansas right in that game. And he was sacked a few times, but it was all about the ground and pound. It was all about the running game. Letty Brown, 19 carries, 156, a touchdown, an average of 8.2. Mathis Jr. even 118, an average of 5.4 on 22, so even more carries than Letty. And both of them just moved the ball all through the night. They clearly saw something in Kansas. They can do it on the ground, and that be enough. How would you evaluate Letty Brown, though, overall this year? Because he ends up with over 1,000 yards, back-to-back years for West Virginia, over 1,000 yards for Letty Brown. If you include the bowl game last year for the Mountaineers, they're going to have another one here for him to stack more yards. It's been a roller coaster ride for him individually, where there were some games where they did nothing on the ground. There was the first 3-4 weeks of the year where many were wondering what was wrong with him, or they were blaming the offensive line. Minimal production from him on the ground, and yet a very quiet and kind of weird finish that he ends up with over 1,000 nonetheless. How would you grade him this year? Because this was an important year for him, even individually, in looking on to what he can do maybe beyond college after ending last year with so much hype coming into this 2021 season.
Certainly, and an up and down season for Letty Brown as well. One thing that was pretty glaring as the year went on, you could see that a lot of West Virginia's success, or in instances lack thereof success, was attributed to his numbers and how he ran the ball. I had Letty Brown coming into tonight with well over 5 yards per carry in West Virginia's 4 victories over FBS opponents and well under 4 yards per carry in the 6 losses. So
there it is.
It kind of goes hand in hand. Obviously, he put up some pretty good numbers tonight. Starts out in very disappointing fashion, loses a fumble on the first play from scrimmage for West Virginia in the game. But overall, I think he's had a pretty solid season. I mean, you can't lose sight of the fact that he did have 13 rushing touchdowns as well. So while the numbers weren't there in some instances, he had several big games, obviously Virginia Tech game, the Iowa State game. Last week, he put up big numbers against Texas. And then tonight, he's able to go out in pretty strong fashion in what we would assume is his last regular season game as a Mountaineer.
Yeah, you would assume that. And again, you assume there's a bowl game coming up for him, but maybe not. We've seen different players make different decisions. But either way, he does turn it on at the end, does show something that's a great game for him to end things if this is it for him. And back-to-back 1,000 yards, not something every Mountaineer running back has done. So that's historic for him in his own right. And it was a kind of a weird dude overall. What would you give as a grade to this overall season here? We have yet to get a bowl game announced for West Virginia, but with 6 wins, knowing the program, knowing the fan base, et cetera, they're going to get an invite to something. Obviously, this is a year, and we talked about this before in a past show, that they were supposed to take a step forward. When you have a hashtag of trust to climb, you do need to advance. Last year, they got a bowl game. They got a bowl victory. Some thought it was a reasonable step. And then this year, maybe a slide back. It's been a roller coaster ride. A win or two that some could brag about. Virginia Tech, even though it's not looked as good as it was then. Iowa State, certainly an upset win at the time. Then some bad losses mixed in. It's been a mixed bag for the team and for Neil Brown. But you end it with a bowl appearance. It could actually be the first time this program wins back-to-back bowl games since 07-08, which is a staggering stat when you think about it. How would you overall now rate this season prior to the bowl game? Because obviously what they do in the bowl game, that certainly could impact your end of the year grade when you include that bowl game.
I would say right in the area of a C. Okay. I kind of revert back to Las Vegas a little bit. Season over on, season win total on the over-under, I believe, was in the 5.5, 6 range. So obviously from that perspective, but you just kind of hit the nail on the head, Mike. I mean, Virginia Tech at the time when you play them, it's a top 20 win. Virginia Tech is nowhere near a top 20 team, at the midpoint of the season, nonetheless today. Yeah. And I think it's kind of fair to look at it from both sides. You change a play or two at Oklahoma, a play or two in a game at home against Texas Tech that West Virginia rightfully probably feels like it should have won, especially when you factor in what the Red Raiders were missing that day. Maybe even a turnover or two at Maryland changes the outcome. But
yeah, 4 turnovers. I would say Maryland's not looked that great. They just got a bowl eligibility today as well over Rutgers. Not a great team.
But you can also kind of look at the glass half empty side of it and think Virginia Tech had numerous opportunities late in that game to steal a win in Morgantown. Iowa State, there was, a pretty dicey goal line fumble that had it not taken place, likely would have tied the game at 38. We don't know ultimately how it would have ended. Yeah. But, there were some results that went West Virginia's way in those games that obviously helped contribute to victories. Ultimately, I think 6 or 7 wins is probably about what we thought was likely to come. And then when you look at the schedule, did we think they were going to be playing a Texas team that was where they were at that point? No, we didn't, but that's also not really West Virginia's concern. They can only really worry about what's in front of them. And obviously you've got teams in the Big 12 that maybe have surpassed expectations. I don't think anybody thought Oklahoma State's defense was going to be among the 5 best in college football.
Sure.
It was. And shut down many teams outside of West Virginia. And I think it's important to remember, as you said, how the bowl game plays out, who you play in the bowl, what bowl game you end up going to will ultimately kind of change that grade a little bit one way or the other, because it is always good to feel good about your program, feel good about the direction that they're heading into the offseason. And if West Virginia is to play an opponent and potentially a Power 5 opponent, it would give them the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and I think we both can agree that a loss to Kansas, even a competitive Kansas team, been a little bit more competitive than some want to give them credit, to end your year when if you won, you would have gotten a bowl game, would have been catastrophic. I mean, that would have been really bad. You'd have no more games. It would just be a press conference where Neil Brown's somehow going to try to explain himself here. That would have divided the fan base. That would have been no good at all. So they avoid that scenario. You have another game. You can figure things out. Just lastly here, Greg Carey joining me here from West Virginia's Metro News. The Mountaineers do get the win. They do end up securing a bowl appearance this year. We don't know who they're going to play. We don't know what game it'll be. So obviously we have to wait to figure those things out. And I'll do another show when we know all that. But if you can even answer this now, but what do you need to see or what do you want to see in that bowl game, regardless of the opponent, for you to be convinced this program is actually climbing? Because obviously the record shows they were neutral. They're in another bowl game. It's not a better bowl game. This year was certainly worse the way it unfolded, and record-wise likely to be similar, if not worse. You certainly could argue they're not climbing. Some may still try to be optimistic. You painted both glass half full and glass half empty. But for you to be convinced they are really, really climbing, which would then be year 4 for Neil Brown next year, what do you need to see in the bowl game, aside from just winning? But like, what do you want to see in that game to say, okay, it didn't go the way we wanted, but it can be better next year, and it can be better next year with Jarret Doege, because that clearly appears to be the case if we got to put money down on who's starting next year, I'd imagine.
Certainly. I think when you look at the result, obviously we're largely in a results-oriented, business. We talk wins and losses. We talk statistics regularly, and that's what we look at. So depending on who the opponent is, obviously, regardless of who the opponent is, I should say.
That's what I'm saying. Right. Yeah. Right. It's going to be a similar team to you. It's not going to, you're not going to be playing Alabama. You're not going to be playing Georgia.
Right. And you're probably looking at a game that, will be within a touchdown spread either way if West Virginia is or isn't favored in it. But I think that part of what makes you maybe feel a little bit better, if you are a West Virginia fan, a follower of the program, some of the production that you've seen later in the season from some of the younger players. I've particularly been impressed with right tackle Wyatt Milam. I think he's a player that if he gets to a point where obviously we've seen the offers that he had coming out of Spring Valley High School, he could have gone to a bigger and better football program, quite frankly, had he wanted to. He chose to stay in state. West Virginia deserves a lot of credit for keeping him in state. I thought he's grown a lot throughout the season. You look at Caden Prather on the wideout. He's made some plays over the last month of the season. St. McLeod, a safety as a true freshman, played every snap against Texas, was in there for most of them tonight. So I think those are things that you kind of hang your hat on. Ultimately, though, like you said, how do you feel about quarterback? It's the most important position on this roster. Right. So now I kind of agree with what you had said. And if you had to make a wager, I would think there's a better chance Jarret Doege is back than isn't. It's not official either way yet, but obviously we'll know in the coming days or weeks what those points are. And I think just maybe a little more spunk. Even take a situation like tonight, 31-21, West Virginia's in relatively complete control, not necessarily blowing Kansas out of the water by any means, but they're in control of the game, moving the ball well. A touchdown and an extra point makes it 38-21 and effectively ends the game. West Virginia stalls out again, has to settle for a field goal, 34-21. And 3 minutes later, you're in a position where you have to recover an onside kick to save the game.
Right. Yeah.
You look at the opportunities, kind of the lack thereof. We saw it a lot in the Virginia Tech game. We saw it at Maryland at times. They had an opportunity to maybe take a possession or two lead at times when they were behind, maybe go up, by a score. At times when they were in front, maybe increase the score. They failed to do that. Oklahoma, they came out and scored on their opening drive, a touchdown, didn't have another one in the game. I think it's more questions and concerns offensively than defensively. I think that, the biggest issue for me defensively on the season would maybe just be a lack of turnovers in spots. But overall, West Virginia's defense played well enough for this team to win 8-9 games.
And sometimes that's luck, as you know, too. Sometimes the turnovers happen off luck, right?
Absolutely, especially with fumbles, and actions on passes and things. But, when you look at what their defensive line was able to accomplish, Akeem Messidor, Dante Stills, Taj Alston, Jared Bartlett, you had multiple guys playing at a high level for a good portion of the season. You had a lot of inexperience in the secondary. Veteran safeties were able to cover up kind of some of those things. I thought Daryl Porter at cornerback got a lot better as the season went on. He had a lot of struggles in that opener at Maryland, and he was pretty comfortably playing as, the top or at least a solidified number 2 corner for the majority of the season. And I thought he showed some improvement. But, when you're in a position where in a lot of these games, you're only able to score 23, 24, 20, in today's college football, it puts a lot of pressure on your defense when you talk about the other team, maybe having 10, 11, or even 12 possessions in a game. So I think, the fan base would just kind of like to see a little more excitement offensively, and I think big plays. And even after Doege threw the pick 6 tonight, obviously a very costly play, but there wasn't many passes. I'd have to go back through and look at the play-by-play, but I bet you didn't 4 passes after that.
Sure.
And that was early in the third quarter. So, from that perspective of it, I think you got to take some solace in the fact that the offensive line doesn't have a senior. I thought they got better as the season went on. Part of that may have been a product of the schedule. Part of it is probably just the fact that they're getting a little bit better as a unit and gelling more up front. And you've got probably 4 or 5 guys on that starting group that'll be back next year as starters. So, you're going to have guys who are plenty comfortable playing with each other. I know Zach Frazier, the center, has been pretty highly regarded by the coaching staff throughout the year for his play. So that's maybe a starting point going into next year. Like we talked about earlier, we don't know who the quarterback is for sure yet. If it's Doege, you're going to have solid protection. When he's protected well, he's proven he can hit receivers. When he's not, he struggles.
If I would have told any West Virginia fan that they would need to recover an onside kick to secure bowl eligibility in a game against Kansas before the year, I'm sure no one would be excited to watch this year unfold. That's the reality. They did convert. They did win. They did beat Kansas. They will be going to a bowl game. And at the minimum, you're going to see one more game with Jarret Doege starting, because unlike when past years when West Virginia's headed into some bowl games, there's no conversation of Doege going to the NFL or anything. He's going to be playing in this bowl game. The practices with Jarret Doege. And yeah, there's a transfer portal. I don't think Green's clearly impressed Brown enough to get any nod to open up next year. I don't think he wants to start a freshman. I don't see how it's not Doege. But hey, the announcement's not been there yet. We will see who is the starter, and we will then see what happens next year as this climb. Right now, putter's a neutral, but what happens in that bowl game is certainly a big deal. You could argue that out of all the teams playing in a mediocre bowl game that really doesn't matter that much, and certainly West Virginia has seen better days too in better bowl games, this bowl game matters a lot for West Virginia, despite it being what it eventually will be. It matters more than what that trophy will say. They do need to play well, even if you don't win against a similar team. It cannot be a Texas Tech effort or a Baylor effort or something like that, or you're going to get a whole year of nobody really trusting this climb. Greg, I definitely appreciate the time. We'll be talking to you again at some point, throughout the year, maybe in basketball season. I definitely appreciate the time on this and other shows here throughout football season. So have a good night, man.
We'll be on, man. I'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.
Absolutely. Greg Carey there of West Virginia's Metro News. Always love talking to him. We could have deep college football conversations for sure. We can go on for hours, but of course he had more work to finish. I do as well. The Mountaineers do claim bowl eligibility, so they do what needed to happen. And as Carl and I talked about last week, you can't really call these big wins for West Virginia because they're just not. Texas is not what they were. The brand name's there, but they're not a good team. They weren't into the game. Kansas is what they are. They're Kansas. They've been competitive at times, but they're not a good team. They're not going to be beating teams that should be in bowl games, or they shouldn't be. They're Kansas. They had that one Orange Bowl appearance. That's basically it for the last 40 years since Gale Sayers and even beyond that of Kansas Jayhawk football. You don't want to be losing to them to end your year when you have a chance of making a bowl game. So these aren't big wins. These are necessary wins. And I'm not going to say the bowl game is a must win because we don't know who they're playing yet. And it will be another team similar to West Virginia. They may not be favored in the game. They may be favored in the game. We don't know who they're playing yet. I got to wait to find out who they're playing. But as Greg and I talked about, they're not going to be playing Georgia. They're not going to be playing Alabama. They're not going to be playing Michigan or Michigan State, Baylor, Ohio State, any of these top 10 teams. Forget the playoff. Top 15, top 25. They're probably not even going to be playing a ranked team, okay? They're going to be playing another team with 6 wins, 7 at the most. It's likely another 6-win team. So it's a mediocre team that also crawled to get bowl eligibility. Some have actually brought up Maryland as a possibility. That's a team West Virginia has already played this year. The 4 interceptions really decided that one. Otherwise, West Virginia could have won that game, losing by 6 with 4 turnovers. That tells you cut those turnovers in half, you probably win that. They've already played them, though. So admittedly, I don't want to see the same team you've already played again. And I don't think that's much of a rival, even though some others may think so. So I don't want that game. But a team like Maryland, I'll put it to you that way, is who they're going to play. So they might be favored. They may not be favored. I can't call it a must-win without knowing the opponent or what the game is. But as Greg and I were talking about, West Virginia has to look good in the game. Jarret Doege has to look good in that game against people that aren't Texas and Kansas to end a year. You're going to see him in that game. There's no conversation of him not playing. He's not looking at anything else, pro, NFL. He's likely coming back next year. And even if he doesn't, he's done. So he's playing. Lady Brown, we'll see what he decides. I think he's going to play. because I think he needs to keep showing himself. But regardless, they're going to get basically this whole team to play in that game. They're going to get more practice. It's a big deal to have the game, and better to have one than not. But West Virginia gets bowl eligibility. They have a lot of questions still needing answered, a lot of pressure on them to win a mediocre bowl game, even though it will be a mediocre bowl game, and they avoid the doomsday scenario of losing to end your year against Kansas and not making a bowl game because of it. They do get that win, and at least will have a postseason as they claim a climb. But last year they were in the same situation with a better bowl game. Are they really climbing? We're going to find out. If they dominate a bowl game against a similar team, maybe they can argue it. That'll get them over 500 at least. West Virginia has some pressure again in that mediocre bowl game. And then from the top of the show, Pitt, a completely different season than West Virginia. Pitt fans certainly can, maybe if they're still tuning in after the original segment, they can appreciate this. We're going to close up shop with Pitt winning their 10th game of the season. So again, Pat Narduzzi, Mark Whipple, Kenny Pickett, they all quiet the doubters. Pitt continues their special season. It's all in front of them, as it's always really been this year. No, the playoff didn't happen. It really was never going to happen. Yes, Western Michigan, even Miami, they're not great losses. Certainly Western Michigan, not a good one at all. The defense collapsed in those games. The defense showed up in this game against Syracuse. It has played well down the stretch. If it keeps on playing like this, there's no reason why, as Erik talked about, Pitt has the better defense, you'd imagine. Wake's had their defensive issues as well. There's no reason why Pitt does not win that ACC crown. I would certainly say Pitt should be favored, and I would expect Pitt to beat Wake Forest and be the ACC champion. And even though the ACC is a bit down this year, Miami's still not back. Florida State's still trying to figure something out. Those normal powerhouses aren't there yet. Clemson's not what they've been the last 5, 6, 7 years as dominating the conference and dominated Pitt last time they were in the ACC title game. Clemson won't be there. And I get the conference is down, but this has been a solid Pitt team all year. This is a good, if not great, Pitt team all year. If Pitt wants to really show they are a great team, and they deserve a really solid ranking, I believe now at 17. That might increase as well, or probably stabilize. You go ahead and show it against Wake Forest, a team that was once ranked in the top 10 this year, that was undefeated most of this season, that played Syracuse, opponent that you just beat down, and had a close showing, almost losing to the Orangemen. So Pitt still has it in front of them to really prove something. And then unlike West Virginia, who's going to face a mediocre team in a mediocre bowl game, you win the ACC and Pitt is going to get a legit bowl game. New Year's 6 legit bowl game against a quality opponent to really show what you can do against somebody maybe from the SEC, from Pac-12, Big Ten, whatever the case may be. It's going to be a legit opponent. I've seen some projections of Pitt Fiesta Bowl actually against the Big 12's Oklahoma. Maybe it'll be Oklahoma State now. Who knows, based on what's happened between the two of them. Maybe whoever does not win the Big 12 maybe will be who Pitt would face if they don't win the conference. If they do win the conference, maybe they'll face the Big 12 winner if that team is not a playoff team, because there's a chance the Big 12 winner could somehow get in the top 4 if things shake out a certain way and Michigan loses and Notre Dame doesn't overtake them, even though they probably would, etc. Even if Cincinnati would somehow lose to Houston. So with that Big 12 winner, a glimmer of hope for the playoff, even though it's unlikely. Maybe if the Big 12 winner does not get in the playoff, they then face Pitt. That's a big opportunity for Pitt against either Oklahoma State or Oklahoma, or anyone they may face. These are going to be legit ranked teams, likely in the top 15, certainly in the top 20. Pitt will have a legit opportunity to really show what they can do as a program and as a team, and Kenny Pickett showcase himself in a major bowl game to really make this a special year for Pitt. For Narduzzi, for Pickett, who, as Erik talked about, his legacy at Pitt is secure. The yardage record, the TD record, he's over Van Pelt, he's over Marino, for crying out loud. This guy proved doubters wrong, who didn't even want him as a starter a few years ago, said he was all the issues with the offense. He's not. He's a leader of this offense, one of the best quarterbacks in the country, should be a Heisman finalist. I could even argue he should win it, even though he won't. And it's all in front of Pitt. So again, as we close up shop on our regular season of coverage throughout our now family of networks, Penn State, by the way, we don't have a show on them, but we did do some earlier on in this season, and we'll try to figure things out for basketball season with Nittany Sports now covering Penn State. But Penn State ends the year with that loss to Michigan State. That's a good Michigan State team, obviously. They do instead Franklin. They don't get what they want out of the year by any means, but they will have a bowl game as well. So we'll see who Penn State, West Virginia, and Pitt will play in those bowl games. Pitt, prior to the bowl season, has the ACC Championship Game. We're going to have full-on coverage this coming week and up until that game about Pitt and Wake Forest. That's an equal opponent to them. I do believe it to be a favorable matchup for Pitt in the game Pitt should win. And if Pitt wins it, they got a major opponent in a New Year's Six major bowl game. If Pitt loses, still a solid season, still a solid bowl game, still a solid opponent, but they got pressure to win that game. They should win that game, and that really can put the explanation point on this 2021 season for Kenny Pickett, Narduzzi, Mark Whipple, and all of Pitt. That'll do it for this final college football regular season post-game show. Thank you to Erik Columbia of News Channel 9, WSYR, pinch hitting there for Alex Sims as we talked Pitt Syracuse. Then, of course, Greg Carey of West Virginia's Metro News, my colleague there at Metro News and someone who is a familiar face and voice to this network. He's been on past shows to touch on West Virginia beating Kansas, holding on for dear life to beat Kansas and to claim bowl eligibility. We will see who the Mountaineers will face in a bowl game as they have one more game to showcase if they are really climbing and try to prove to some doubters that they are really climbing. Whereas Pitt has a chance to win a major conference. That is a big deal, to say the least. Pitt won that Big East. They were in a BCS bowl game, Fiesta Bowl. They lost. They were barely ranked in the top 25. They got in because the winner of the conference, which was down at the time, automatically got in. Pitt has not won the ACC since being in the ACC. They were in the title game one other time. They lose to Clemson, who was just a powerhouse. This would be an undisputed conference title, despite you could say the conference is down all you want. This would be it. You couldn't dispute it. It's in front of themselves for Pitt. So Pitt needs to get the job done to fully be it this year to cap off this special season. And at least West Virginia does have a bowl season to try to prove that a climb is actually climbing.